All right, so the U.S. electoral system, specifically the Electoral College. Ready to dive in. We're going to start with a clip from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. This clip, it had me cracking up, but it also, it got me thinking, like seriously thinking about how we elect presidents in this country. Colbert, he's got this way of making you laugh, but also, like, making you question things,
Yeah, what really struck me was like millions of Americans vote in these elections, right? But they aren't actually directly choosing the president. They're voting for these people. They're called electors. And it's these electors who form like this thing called the Electoral College.
It's like this extra step, right?
Yeah.
Like a middleman for democracy.
Exactly. And it leads to some pretty wild situations like the ones Colbert highlights.
So that's exactly what we're going to unpack today, right?
Yeah.
Why do we even have this system? And does it still make sense?
Yeah. Is it still relevant in the 21st century?
Okay, so let's get everyone on the same page here. How does this Electoral College thing actually work?
So each state, it gets a certain number of electors based on how many people it has in Congress. So one elector for every House member and then two for each senator.
So the size of a state's population really matters here, right?
Absolutely. And here's where it gets a little tricky. In most states, it's what we call a winner-takes-all system. So the person who gets the most votes in that state, they usually get all of its electoral votes. Colbert, he uses California as an example. Like, you could have millions of votes in a big state like California, right? And those votes, they might actually have less impact on the election than a smaller state with way fewer voters. It's kind of crazy. Like, where you live could actually make your vote count, more or less.
It's mind-blowing. So you're saying someone could become president without getting the most votes overall?
Exactly. It's happened a few times throughout history. It's actually one of the biggest criticisms of the Electoral College. Colbert's clip even mentions some examples like John Quincy Adams, Rutherford B. Hayes, George W. Bush, and even Donald Trump. All presidents who won the election, even though they didn't win the popular vote.
Wow. No wonder people question whether it's actually fair or not. And it makes Colbert's jokes about Florida and it being this swing state, it makes those jokes even funnier and kind of scary.
Yeah, it is kind of ironic because candidates know Florida could go either way. They spend a lot of time campaigning there. They really focus on trying to win over those voters.
So they might end up focusing on policies that appeal to Florida voters specifically, even if those policies aren't the best for everyone else in the country.
Right. That's one of the main arguments against the Electoral College. It can make candidates focus on pleasing certain regions instead of, addressing the needs of the entire nation.
That's really interesting and a little unsettling, honestly. So the Founding Fathers, they had their reasons for setting up the Electoral College in the first place, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. To really get it, we have to go back way back to the late 1700s. The Founding Fathers, they were worried about a couple of things. They wanted to make sure the larger states didn't have too much power and that the smaller states still had a voice in choosing the president. And they weren't entirely comfortable with the idea of a pure democracy where just the popular vote decided everything.
So they were trying to create a system that would work for this new nation with all its different interests and states of different sizes. But like Colbert's clip shows, this system can have some pretty unexpected and sometimes controversial results.
For sure. And there are even more quirks to it, like why Maine and Nebraska don't follow that winner-takes-all rule, and why U.S. territories, places like Puerto Rico where people are U.S. citizens, why they don't have any electors at all.
Now that's strange. So we've got this system. It was designed ages ago, and it's got these unusual features and some potential problems too. Colbert's clip, it's really pushing us to think about whether the Electoral College still makes sense today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just about history and how it works. It's about how those things impact how we choose our leaders and how those leaders then govern us.
Okay.
It's a big deal.
Okay, so we've been talking about all these weird things about the Electoral College and how it can lead to some, unexpected results. But I'm assuming there are reasons why people want to keep it around, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There are people who are really passionate about defending the Electoral College, and they have some good points,
What are their main arguments?
Well, one of the big ones is that it forces candidates to try to get support from all over the country. They can't just focus on the big cities where it's easy to rack up votes. They have to appeal to voters in different states, different kinds of places to get enough electoral votes.
So it makes them think about the needs of both, like rural and urban voters.
That's the idea, yeah.
I see the logic there, but doesn't the winner-takes-all system kind of work against that?
Yeah.
It seems like they'd still be focused on those swing states where they can flip all the electoral votes at once. instead of spreading their efforts out more evenly, you know?
That's a fair point. The way it works now, it definitely gives a few swing states a lot of power. And like Colbert was saying, that can lead to policies that are really tailored to those specific states, even if they're not the best for the rest of the country.
Right, like those jokes about Florida and how it influences things like the Cuban embargo or tax breaks for jet skis. Funny, but kind of scary too, you know?
Yeah, it shows how a system that was made a long time ago can end up not really working so well today.
Okay, so we've got the argument about broad support. What other reasons do people give for keeping the Electoral College?
Another common argument is that it protects the smaller states. Remember how each state gets 2 electors just because of its senators? That gives those less populated states more of a say in who becomes president, compared to a system where it's just based on the total number of votes across the whole country.
So it's like a way to make sure that those smaller states don't get completely ignored.
Exactly. It prevents a few really big states from basically deciding the election all by themselves, and maybe forcing their will on the rest of the country.
I can see both sides of that. But what about the fact that it's possible to win the presidency without winning the popular vote? It feels like that goes against the whole idea of majority rules in a democracy.
Yeah, that's a huge point of contention. It's one of the main reasons why some people want to get rid of the Electoral College altogether. They see it as undemocratic and outdated. Like, you can become president even if most people in the country didn't vote for you.
And Colbert's clip pointed out that it's actually happened multiple times. Makes you wonder if the system really reflects what people want.
Yeah, it raises some serious questions about whether it's really fair or legitimate. If someone can win without the most votes, it can make people feel like their votes don't really matter.
So we've got arguments for and against the Electoral College. It's definitely a complicated issue with strong feelings on both sides. But what about reforms? Are there any alternatives to the current system that people have proposed, like ways to address some of these concerns without just getting rid of it completely?
That's a great question, and that's where things get really interesting because there are actually a few different ideas out there.
Oh, okay, I'm all ears.
So one reform that's been getting some attention is this thing called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
The what?
The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
Okay, that sounds interesting. What is that?
Basically, it's an agreement between states where they promise to give all of their electoral votes to whoever wins the popular vote nationwide, even if that person didn't win in their specific state.
So if enough states join this compact, it would basically override the Electoral College and make sure the person who gets the most votes across the country always becomes president. It's like hacking the system.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. It's a way to get the same result as a national popular vote without actually changing the Constitution.
Clever. So is this compact actually gaining any traction? Or is it just a long shot?
It's definitely been gaining momentum lately, but it's not a sure thing yet. There are still some legal and political hurdles to overcome. Not everyone's on board, and there are questions about whether it would hold up in court.
Sounds like something worth exploring, though. Are there any other reform ideas out there?
Another idea that's been floated is to, divide up the electoral votes within each state instead of doing the whole winner-takes-all thing.
So instead of the winner getting all the electoral votes, they'd get a portion based on how many votes they got.
Exactly. That way, even third-party candidates or independent candidates could have a chance to get some electoral votes, even if they don't win a whole state.
That makes sense. It seems like that would make it more, representative of what the voters in each state actually want.
Yeah, that's the idea. And it could maybe make those swing states less important because candidates would have a reason to campaign everywhere, not just focus all their energy on a few battleground states.
So we've got the National Popular Vote Compact and this proportional allocation thing.
Yeah.
Anything else people are talking about?
Well, there's always the option of just getting rid of the Electoral College entirely and just electing the president based on who gets the most votes nationwide. But that would require changing the Constitution, which is really, really hard to do.
Yeah, amending the Constitution is a big deal.
Yeah.
But it's clear that the Electoral College, the system that was created so long ago, it's facing a lot more scrutiny now.
Absolutely. As the country changes and politics evolves, we need to keep asking if our systems are still working the way they should, and if they really reflect the values of a modern democracy.
That's a great point. It's like checking in and asking, is this still the best way to do things?
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the main takeaway for our listeners?
The takeaway is that the Electoral College It's not just some historical footnote. It has a real impact on how our presidents are chosen and how they govern. So understanding how it works, the arguments for and against it, and the potential reforms, that's really important for anyone who wants to be an informed citizen, someone who can participate in our democracy in a meaningful way.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The history, the mechanics, the arguments for and against it. Even talked about some potential reforms. But now I'm curious, what does the future hold for the Electoral College? Is it here to stay, or is it on its way out?
Well, predicting the future is always a gamble, right? Especially when it comes to something as complicated as this. But we can, look at some of the things that are happening now, and maybe that'll give us some clues.
Yeah. What are some of the factors that might shape what happens to the Electoral College?
Public opinion's a big one. Polls show that more and more Americans want to get rid of the Electoral College altogether and switch to a system where the president is just whoever gets the most votes nationwide.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially after, some recent elections where the person who won the popular vote didn't actually become president.
Exactly. When people start feeling like the system isn't fair or that it doesn't reflect what most people want, it makes them lose trust in the system. And that can create a lot of pressure for change.
So we've got public opinion pushing for change. But is that enough?
It's a good start, but it's not the whole story. We also have to think about political will. Do the people who are actually in charge, the elected officials, do they want to change the system?
Right, because even if the public wants reform, it's up to lawmakers to make it happen.
Exactly. And historically, there's been a lot of resistance to changing the Electoral College, especially from politicians who benefit from the way it works now.
Why would they be hesitant to change something that seems to be getting so much criticism?
Well, self-interest plays a role. If you're a politician from a smaller state, you might worry about losing influence if we get rid of the Electoral College.
Because their state would have less power in a national popular vote system.
Right. And if you're a politician from a swing state, you might not want to give up all the attention and influence that your state gets now.
So even if changing the system might be good for the country as a whole, some politicians might resist it because it's not in their own best interest.
Yeah, that definitely happens. And it's not just about individual politicians either. The two big political parties, they also have a lot at stake when it comes to potential reforms.
Oh, so?
Each party does these calculations, trying to figure out whether a national popular vote would help them win more elections or hurt them. They look at all sorts of data like voting patterns, demographics, where people live, all that stuff.
So it's like a big game of strategy where each side is trying to outmaneuver the other.
Kinda, yeah. And that can make it really hard to get both parties to agree on any big changes.
So we've got public opinion, political will, and all the strategic stuff going on. Anything else we should be thinking about?
One more thing to consider is legal challenges. If we try to make big changes to the system, especially without actually amending the Constitution, there are probably going to be lawsuits.
Right, because the Constitution sets the rules for how we elect the president.
Exactly. So any changes would have to be done in a way that's consistent with the Constitution, and the courts would probably have to decide whether any new system is legal or not.
So the future of the Electoral College is kind of up in the air, huh? It depends on what the public wants, what politicians are willing to do, and what the courts decide.
That's the big question, isn't it? It's really hard to say for sure what will happen. There's definitely momentum for reform, but there are also strong forces pushing back. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Well, I'll be watching for sure. This has been really eye-opening. I feel like I have a much better understanding of how the Electoral College works, why we have it, the problems it causes, and what we could do to change it.
That's great to hear. That's what we're here for. We want to give people the information they need to be informed citizens, people who can think critically about these systems and advocate for positive change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Electoral College, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away?
I want them to remember that the future of the Electoral College isn't set in stone. It's being shaped right now by the actions and decisions of everyday people, lawmakers, and the courts. Your voice matters, your vote matters, and understanding this system matters.
Well said. We encourage you to keep learning, keep talking about this stuff, and stay informed. This is a crucial part of our democracy, and we all have a role to play. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.